used. Very pleased to have Gilles Debizet from the University of Grenoble and Professor Doina Pătrescu from the University of Sheffield, but also of Atelier d'Architecture Autogérée in Paris. So we have some really great speakers who are going to be reflecting on their experience of transdisciplinarity in housing, but also hopefully together we'll be thinking about how we can make the whole field just that bit more transdisciplinary, what really needs to be done. So I haven't introduced people much because I want them to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Ashraf Salama. Ashraf, who wrote a paper way back in 2006 on transdisciplinarity in housing. And we're really curious to know whether things have evolved since then, because that paper was a big inspiration for the Readwell project, and it was one of the foundations of the actual bid, which was so it was extremely helpful to us. So Ashraf, it would be great if you would talk a little bit about your stance on transdisciplinarity.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for having me in this gathering. And I would see really the value of it and how it can bring a lot of benefits. So my name is Ashraf Salama. I'm a professor of architecture at the University of Strathclyde. I have been a little bit away from architecture in terms of the nature of research I'm doing, which is more in urban studies. I am the director of research and academic lead of the cluster of architecture and urbanism in the Global South, which places emphasis on issues related to Middle East, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. Through, of course, a big cohort of PhD students. So I will stop here in terms of my introduction, but if you want to know more about who I am and what I'm doing in terms of research, please visit the university website. So my work has been centered on social and cultural sustainability in different ways and person environment studies, basically human behavior in the built environment, or as they call them in America, environment behavior studies. Or environment behavior interactions as they relate to a number of issues or a number of themes: architecture education, design studio teaching practices, and emerging cities in the Middle East. So as Flora was saying, I have been associated with the topic since 2006 through research done in the context of the city of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Then in 2011 and 12, we started to work on a special volume of Open House International, which is a very old journal that continued and still there for probably 45 years. And basically, we were trying to explore the relationship between sustainability, affordability, and lifestyle theories. At that time, lifestyle theories, as an idea or as a concept, was really immature. So we were talking about it, but not in a structured way. And then we moved on to a number of research activities through funded research, trying by Qatar National Research Fund, trying to look or compare 4 different cities in the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Doha, Manama, trying to look, because these are very, or societies that are in flux. You find expatriates today, the same people are not there next year, and all of this. So housing dynamics are really very different from the context of Europe. But before I go into the research, I just want to say 2 things about housing studies in general, and then one or a couple of points about transdisciplinarity. So in terms of housing studies, when we really look at the body of knowledge in housing, especially from an architecture, urban planning, urban studies perspective, you will find 2 approaches, basically. One approach is very technical, focusing on cost reduction, technical issues of sustainability, credit, finance, tenure, and all of these issues. And then you will find another component, which is stylistic discussions about authenticity, cultural issues as they relate to housing production. And it also relates to some social narratives of household structure, defense theory, and all of these. These approaches never meet. People who talk about the technicalities of sustainability have their own paradigm of thinking, tools and techniques and all of that. And people who talk, or scholars who talk about cultural authenticity, are in a different paradigm. So this is fine in terms of the level of depth and comprehensiveness. But where is the problem? The problem is that issues in affordable housing and in sustainability, as it relates to affordable housing, are always addressed in isolation. And there is no doubt about this when we look at many housing projects. All the factors that impact or that provide a good understanding of sustainable affordable housing are either oversimplified or focused on one area and give one good picture of how things are, but ignore or oversimplify or basically superficially address other issues. So my disciplinary approach to housing study is to try to be as transdisciplinary as possible. And this was reflected, because it's not really easy to do that. Transdisciplinarity is not an easy subject. Why? Because we are living in academic tribes culture who adopt tribal thinking. So if you talk to engineers, they have their own way of thinking. If you talk to architects, they have their own way of thinking. If you talk to social scientists, they have this. So, and when we sit with planners, or as planners or architects, when we sit with other people of different disciplinary backgrounds, the first thing we say, this is not how we do things. Once you say that, you establish the boundaries between us and other people or other expertise or specialty. So basically the approach is to try to look at this, to avoid it based on the notion of triangulation, looking at affordability, sustainability, and lifestyles together. But again, I want to go to that idea of monodisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and others. So, and I'll get back later to the idea of triangulation. But for now, transdisciplinary research, I want to differentiate between two things: transdisciplinary research and transdisciplinary action. These are two different things. Transdisciplinary research is about the production of transdisciplinary knowledge related to housing. But transdisciplinary action is something else, which by default could lead to considering design and planning as a process of action research. Even design and planning can be, as we design, we can generate knowledge. But we're designing with whom and how, that's a different story, which we'll talk about also. So housing production from the 20s to the 70s was focusing on monodisciplinarity. So if it's about social housing, then one field dominates the whole thing, which is building economy or cost reduction, and that's it. All other fields or areas of interest take a backseat. Then the idea of multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity started to occupy the collective psyche of academics and professionals, probably from the mid-70s till today. And in my view, they don't mean anything. Even when we say multidisciplinarity, it doesn't mean anything. It means that a number of disciplines are going in parallel addressing a problem. And why they don't mean much? Because still the boundaries of disciplines are recognized. And there is a demarcation of the area of interest when we talk with other people in these two paradigms of thinking, whether multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity. So that's one of the problems. But then transdisciplinary research emerged. I would say, people started to talk about it. As far as I understand, I attended a session in 1998 in Switzerland, and there was a discussion about transdisciplinarity to reflect the need for addressing the plurality of issues, social, environmental, economic imperatives relevant to affordable housing. So transdisciplinarity is basically a totally different paradigm. Why? Because monodisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, we're looking at housing in terms of what it is. Transdisciplinarity looks at housing in terms of what it does, how it impacts people's lives. These are two different ways of thinking. So that's about transdisciplinary research. So transdisciplinary action, which is different, and I would say it's the ultimate goal for achieving good environments, for generating good environments, is about basically it's a recognition that knowledge is produced in the context of its application. And that's different from actual research that generates knowledge only. So it's about knowledge-based practice. Considering transdisciplinarity, heterogeneity, social accountability, reflexivity, all of these. Of course, these are very, very difficult areas if we look at them in abstract terms, but what does this mean? It means that transdisciplinary action involves different types of knowledge coming from different types of groups who sit together and discuss how they're going to solve a problem. But who are these groups is a very, very important question. So we have scientific and expert knowledge. We have folk or indigenous knowledge. We have practical or vocational knowledge. And we have tacit or experiential knowledge. All of these are really very important to integrate. This is why we are calling all the time for co-production, participatory practices. Why do we call for participation? Participation is basically to try to integrate all these types of knowledge. I'm not talking about consultation where people go and have a nice little party and some tea and cake and watch the planners make a presentation and they give some very, very minor input and go home. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about real participation where people have an opportunity to shape their future. So is time okay, Flora? Or should I stop now and then?
Probably should be winding up very soon.
Okay. So back to the idea of triangulation, looking at affordability and sustainability, always they are, when we say affordability, it's only cost reduction, ignoring other social imperatives. When we say sustainability, it's only technical issues, no social, no cultural. So I try to focus on lifestyle theories, trying to say, okay, housing perception and housing production should be introduced in the formula of discussing housing, whether at the level of research or at the level of transdisciplinary action, actual design. So because of affordability and sustainability, there is a lot of effort and a lot of literature, and everybody has been talking about either affordability or sustainability in different terms. So my research approach looks at the idea of lifestyles, trying to bring three disciplines together: sociology, anthropology, and ethnography, to integrate, to form frameworks that recognize that lifestyle is a product of culture and past experiences. Lifestyle is a product of contemporary social structures, and lifestyle is a product of individual and life moods. And I can talk about these in very much detail, but I think I should stop here and then leave colleagues, and then we can keep discussing.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. That was a great start to the session. Over to you, David. I imagine there's things you want to respond to in there. What's your take on transdisciplinarity?
Right. Yes. Well, there was a lot I agreed with Ashraf, but maybe I've come at it from a slightly different direction. Perhaps I should go back to talk about my first year as a student. The other day asked me how long I'd been teaching and researching housing, and the answer was 45 years, which startled me. And as you said, one of the things that I did as part of that was that I was editor for 15 years, I think, of the journal Housing Theory and Society, in which we tried to grapple with a lot of these kind of issues about what housing studies was and how you could get some kind of integration between different perspectives. I suppose I've come at it partly because of my background, surprisingly, maybe in terms of my work over that 45 years. My first degree was actually in business studies. And the one good thing about that degree of business studies was that I had a grounding in all of the social sciences. So although it kind of majored in economics, actually, I also studied a lot of sociology, psychology, and political science. So that gave me a nice kind of spread of understanding of the basics of those disciplines, a very superficial one, but a very useful one. And then I did my postgraduate work in social policy. And the idea really of social policy, certainly at that stage, was that you focus on problems. So you take a field, you take an issue, and you work out from that issue. And that meant that a lot of social policy was non-theoretical. It wasn't conceptual. It tended to be just empirical. But a lot of people moved from that idea, I've got a problem, what kind of concepts or theories would actually help me to understand that problem? And I suppose in work that I've done, like work, for example, on homelessness, I think I've worked with psychologists in terms of trying to link individual behavior into more structural issues. I've worked with political scientists on things like policy, how does policy get made, what research helps policy, those kinds of issues. But I think I've always come back to this idea that housing is a field of study. It's an issue, and I agree completely with Ashraf, and I'll maybe get into this a bit more, that it's about what it does. Housing is the way that we should express it rather than what it is. It's not just a dwelling, it is a process, it is an ongoing process. And I've been looking at ways of trying to get a more holistic framework to examine those kinds of those issues around housing. I suppose I first started on things like I drifted towards a lot of sociology. So I then took up ideas about social constructionism, but always wanted to link it into ideas about structuration, work of Giddens and Bourdieu, and ideas about social practices. And that enabled me to kind of bring together the individual and the structural issues. But what has stayed with me on my journey through that, if you like, is this idea of social practices. And it's one that I want to come back to because I think it offers us a framework for transdisciplinarity. And practices is very much about what housing does, what it rather than what it is. It's about the, I've used the idea of lifestyle. I'd go a little bit further than that and use the idea of practices, maybe ideas about homemaking practices or house production practices. And if you combine that with ideas that about nature and the fact that housing and cities are part of nature, and what that means is that you can then begin to do away with the distinctions between in humans, between the mind and the body, and between humans and the rest of nature, between humans, animals, and materials. And once you can actually go beyond those kinds of distinctions, which some social theories do, things like assemblage theory, actor network theory, it enables you to take a more comprehensive view of all of those different elements and draw them into the analysis, which immediately draws you into ideas of transdisciplinarity, because traditionally the way those different elements have been looked at has been the subject of different disciplines, and they've been looked at using very different philosophies and techniques. But perhaps just to also, before I get into it in a little bit more, just to focus on this idea of transdisciplinarity not being easy. And the reason it's not being easy is that these disciplines do actually involve fundamental ideas about the nature of society, the nature of nature, the nature of materials, and so on. And actually, therefore, when I found right from the beginning, trying to draw concepts and theories from different areas, you very often had to redefine them. You had to look at what the concepts were, what the basic fundamentals of them were, how they fitted into the worldview. And you probably had to redefine them to be able to kind of bring them together with other kinds of disciplines. And that makes things easy, makes things quite difficult to do, quite intensive to do. So what I'm working on now is this idea of trying to take a holistic view of housing. I've tried to redefine the field. So rather than call it housing, I want to call it inhabitation. So what we're doing is inhabiting a space in terms of time, context, in terms of the nature. And in inhabiting that, we undertake various kinds of practices, and part of those practices are animals and materials. And to give an example, maybe one that's been researched quite well is an example of heating and energy use in houses. So they are involved in all kinds of practices like washing, showering, bathing, for example. And what you've got involved in the practice of bathing, you've got the social elements of it, you've got the social norms of how often we wash. I mean, I was brought up in the first house I lived in didn't have a bathroom. It had an outside toilet. Bathing was something you did once a week in a tub in front of the fire. But we've now got to the situation that we shower every day or more than once a day or whatever. So that's a kind of social norm. But then you've got all the materials that are used. You've got the soaps and the different kinds of soaps. You've got the heating technology in terms of providing the hot air. You've got the design of the house in terms of the fact that we've now got as many bathrooms as we have bedrooms in houses. So, and you've got things like animals as well. We wash our dogs or some people do wash their dogs in the showers. Dogs and cats require a certain amount of heating. So there's this interesting studies on how pets are the silent partners in the household, in the sense that trying to keep them happy in terms of them also not being cold, being dry, and so on, and feeding them is actually part of an important part of homemaking practices. So you've got all these different elements. You can only understand each of those individually, like why do we have so many bathrooms? What will the impact be of new technology to heat hot water in houses, by looking at all of those things together through. And I think the idea of practices brings this together. And of course, when you're looking at things like technology, you use different kinds of techniques to do that, and they're based on different disciplines. I haven't, of course, worked this out completely, but I got an insight from the work, which isn't often quoted in our field, of Kenneth Wilber. And he has, there are lots of things I don't agree with Wilber about. One of the insights he gave to me was the idea of the holon. So what he does is suggest that all matter is made up of a holon. And holon, he says, is part individual and part collective. Holons only actually exist as part of, in liaison with other kind of holons. But he then says every holon has 4 elements, quadrants, and that to understand that holon, you actually need to look at all 4 of these quadrants. And these quadrants are very interesting. Across the one line, one axis, he will have individual and collective. And on the other axis, he's got the outside and the inside. So in terms of the individual outside, you're looking at studies of behavior. And these have been fairly common in things, sociology, for example, how do people behave? It's the external measurement of behavior. In terms of collective, it's about how individuals work together. Systems theory fits into this. For example, ideas about some of the areas of assemblage theory, looking at networks and how networks operate. And when you get to the inside individual is about, it could be psychology, it could be hermeneutics. It's looking at the way that individuals operate and the mix of kind of materials and brain power and so on. And then the collective element of that is about culture and about discourse. Now, he says, if you want to understand the holon, you need to understand each of those quadrants. And the insight to me also was then saying, well, these things aren't wrong. So I've always considered systems theory to be wrong because it ignores certain kind of elements. And his insight, I think, is he said, it's not wrong, it's just partial. It just gives you one part of the picture. So actually, what you need to do is just integrate it with these other parts of the picture. Now, what Wilber doesn't do is give you any guide about how you do this integration. I mean, he talked about the links between them. So he says, for example, you can find links across so that, the individual behavior is linked to collective behavior and so on. And you can find patterns across in that kind of way. But he doesn't give us any real understanding of how we can assess all of those together. So that's the point that I'm at, that I'm using this idea of practices, I think. And it's a field which goes back to Giddens, Bourdieu in the 60s, maybe. But it's got recently updated, the work of Elizabeth Chauve and others. And Shapsky and others, and it is linked very much now to ideas about environmentalism and about the need to take a holistic view of nature to be able to understand issues about sustainability, about climate change, and so on. So it's the idea of incorporating animals and materials into the idea of practices has become very much to the forefront.
Thank you, David. Gosh, we're writing so many notes, and one of the people in the chat has said, could you write the reference you've mentioned in the chat, please? I think that'd be very helpful to everybody.
Which record is that? The Wilbur?
Wilbur, I think so. And the hold on. I'm going to, while you're doing that, move on to Doina. I'm sure she has. There are many echoes in the work that Doina does. Doina, will you give us what's your take on transdisciplinarity and what's your feeling about what's been said so far? You're on mute. Oh, by the way.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so I'll come from probably a different angle. I'm a professor of architecture and design activism in Sheffield, and I'm also leading the design practice and engagement research group there. So you can see that I'm coming from a more, let's say, practice-based research angle. I'm also a practitioner as member and co-founder of Atelier d'Architecture Autogérée in Paris, which is a practice that is doing has pioneered and is quite well known for participative architecture. And my interest is very much in participative architecture, urban resilience, gender, and urban commons. I'm trained as architect, but also I have a PhD in women's studies, so I'm already I have experience through my training, a sort of transdisciplinary profile, and I found this very, very useful. And my current research, where I'm operating somehow between academia and the practice, is on urban resilience in suburban neighborhoods, proposing somehow a new model of co-produced regeneration based on the creation of networks of civic hubs in order to support collective resilience practices. So we can see that already in the way the topic is formulated, I understand architecture and urban design for what it does rather than what it is. So the research has finally led to the creation of 5 hubs, 5 civic hubs in 2 metropolitan areas, in Paris and in London, under a framework that is called Urban, which is a bottom-up strategy for resilience. And through this, we have created a number of tools to generate change and in social relations, in policy, in ecological and economic practices at the local level. So I think this is a kind of complex transdisciplinary project where transdisciplinary is understood as this fusing of theories, of methods, expertise, and practices across different disciplinary boundaries, where all these merged somehow one with the other in order to formate a whole, which is this framework, which is much more than than the simple sum of the parts. So these civic hubs that are the core of the strategy are somehow complex outputs. They are managed by inhabitants, and they are also located in social housing estates. And I think this is quite interesting because, again, they are not housing per se, they are not dwellings, but they are related to housing. They are facilities that allow inhabitants to have collective agency as dwellers. So they are located in between the housing units. And I think probably this is another aspect of transdisciplinarity, the extending the view and the definition of the field. I think David David said this as well before. I think you spoke about renaming, in habitation rather than housing. I think in this case we are referring to housing also in terms of outdoor spaces, in terms of way of being in the city. So we have looked also at architecture as a process, so not only as a limited physical output, and we looked at what and how architecture produces, enhances, and invents everyday life practices. So we look at architecture as resource and infrastructure for people to learn about how to be more resilient and to have agency into resilience. So for this, we had to consider aspects of environmental governance, of social governance, also economic aspects, because we wanted people to develop also economic activities there in order to create their own jobs, and to not only change their lifestyle, but also their way of working. And of course, spatial and sociological aspects were very important. And we have discovered also that there are particular relations that are created between space and how we organize space as architects, so to say, and the effects that that this can create. That could be environmental effects. For example, we had this greenhouse integrated into architecture that has also an aesthetic value. Because it created a particular type of space, which was very nice, with greenery. But also, we use the greenhouse as a form of passive heating, also for social gatherings, for huge collective meals. That would mean that economic benefits can be generated also by the space. So we looked also at the value that is generated by such spaces, which is not only economic, but also ecological, and value of well-being. And of course, for this, you need other disciplines to contribute. This notion of value in itself is already a transdisciplinary notion. And in order to, for example, calculate value, we have worked with economists and environmental scientists, and with the users themselves. And then probably this is also another dimension of transdisciplinarity, the inclusion of non-academic stakeholder also in the process of knowledge production. Coming back to this calculation of value, which was a few-year research project, and then conducted to a quite important article that we have published together with a very well-known geographer and economist, Catherine Gibson, and it was a very successful, I think, experience of collaboration, of transdisciplinary collaboration, because she brought a matrix of calculation developed within the research on community return on investment. And we have translated and applied this matrix and also modified in the context of urban. And this created a tool that can be now used by other people running collective projects. We call them urban commons, or and this can be also an argument in the kind of day-to-day negotiation of space in the city. In fact, there was a context in which we did this value calculation, because at the time in 2014, one of the hub was evicted, was threatened with eviction in order by the local municipality, that there were elections and the new mayor has been elected that had other interests than the one of serving the community, I would say. So the hub was under threat to be evicted from the site, and the site was meant to be developed by real estate investors. And we have we wanted to demonstrate that the value, which is most of the time invisible and uncalculated, that is created by such a project for the community, is much bigger than the financial value of the site on the real estate market. And in order to do this, we needed to calculate, the value of the ecological repair, the value of the social activity which takes place, the value of the enhanced abilities that people have by doing this, the value of well-being, and so on. And all this is usually invisible in the kind of current normative way economic value is calculated. I think it was, well, for that site, it was a little bit too late. We wanted to use it as a proof during the case in court, but it remained a great tool for others, and I'm sure it will have an incredible impact for changing the mind and changing the view of the value of a site which is invested by the community in the city. I think probably this is my contribution to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Doina. The idea of value as a transdisciplinary notion, I think, is really fundamental to a lot of the ESR projects that have been going on here, and certainly to my work. That was really helpful. I'm going to pass on now to Gilles, who from Laboratoire Pact in Grenoble, who, as I understand it, you work on energy, but you work within the social sciences, so you're already a very transdisciplinary person before we've even started. So over to you, Gilles.
Okay, thank you, Flora. Hello, everyone. May I use a PowerPoint?
If you like.
Yes.
I think you can share. It was working.
So you can see?
Yes, that's working.
Okay, I would like to thank Jean-Christophe and Adriana for inviting me to participate in this visual workshop. When Adriana asked me to participate, I warned her, I have not worked on collective using for 10 years. My recent work is on energy in collaboration with engineering researcher. And she said she knows that, but urban energy and interdisciplinary research project is of interest of her. So I'm with you today. So I'm practicing interdisciplinarity for 10 years, and I can say that interdisciplinarity is a continuous fight. I could describe numerous difficulties and numerous breaks, and also strategies to resist, but I prefer show how it's possible through an example of transdisciplinary research project. So I will show you present some aspect of the sorry, it was not good. So some aspect of the cross-disciplinary program EcoCESA Smart Energy in Districts. This program involved 16 laboratories including only three in social science. And we together recruited 23 contractual junior researchers, so a PhD candidate or postdoctoral fellow. EcoCESA, as you can see, is organized in 5 research fronts. Each one falls in the lines with the most current international scientific literature and required interdisciplinary collaboration. That together contribute to the climate challenge of integration of on-the-spot renewable energy generation in urban areas. So today my comment will focus on the research fronts 3 and 4 that are focused on the neighborhood scale, district scale. And the first one concern interactions. In fact, the first one is mainly analytical, and the second one, so research front 4, is mainly projective. In order to change the usual tools of engineering, of energy engineering. That there are some relation with what Dauda explains, that we try to. That's why in this research front, our colleague of engineering try to introduce social value in modeling, in energy system modeling. So, following slide. So the EcoCESA program is based on a new paradigm that can be summarized as follows. Renewable energies allow direct exchange between buildings and between communities, and that call into question the historic functioning of networks and also the social relations at the local scale. We use the notion of socio-energy assemblage. So we consider energy infrastructure as an assemblage of socio-energy nodes. So a socio-energy node is a located set of material and organizational elements that gather, convert, store, and or supplies energy flows, and is also supervised by a main decision maker in interaction with human and non-human actors. This concept comes from an observation of energy issues in eco-district, in some French and European eco-district, and we observe that new intermediary actors and also energy systems between utility and buildings. Indeed, we can no more understand the social transformation underway if we are content, as economists or lawyers do, to analyze the relation between the network and the producer, or between the network and the consumer. It is necessary to be able to explore directly the relation between producer and consumers, and also between the local extractions, the use, and as David explained, the discharge in local environment. So how do we work? First, we have to consider disciplinary aims. In fact, the researchers that were involved in the project are not necessarily interested by interdisciplinarity. Both of them want to explore new questions in their own discipline. So on the one hand, so you can see on the blue this disciplinary aim, monodisciplinary aims, and on the right part the methodology. So on the one hand, the aim is to understand the social charge related to the capture of renewable energy for direct use in buildings. On the other hand, it's about at the bottom of the slide. It's about taking this change into account in decision support tools for urban project and for energy system design. To do this, we've developed a common method that is fairly classic in urban sciences, so observation and analysis. The originality of the project lies in three characteristics. So identifying socio-energy nodes as defined before, building a common analytical framework, and sharing observation and survey. Therefore, we can also collaborate in order to collaborate with researchers in engineering and architectural design. So I can show you some example of results. So Marta, which is also here with us today, show that the implementation of laundry accountings, as you can see here on this paper, limits the intrusion of the community into household privacy. Another kind of result is the observation of the French regulations. So although officially encouraged, community self-generation is usually empowered, especially by national uniformity taxation, funding the electricity network. And the electricity networks, in this case, in national controversy, is usually presented as a pillar of territorial equity and national solidarity. Other results concern the intertwining between energy design and between architectural design. And we observe that if we want to project developing ambitious results concerning renewable energy and the share on the spot of this energy, usually have to be conducted away from public energy distributor. So that was for comprehensive results. If we also have projective results, so concern in relation to modeling and representing energy. Most of the results I presented just before have been used to develop decision support tools. Modeling the constraint and objective of the stakeholder of a renewable project could enable them to revise their initial objective in order to find a compromise on the financing and operational transactions. And we observed that, in fact, the optimum of a district energy project is never don't shape the energy system. In fact, social value of the different stakeholders have a strong effect on the reality of energy system. Another result is another projective tool is the urban transect that represent pipes and flows and reveals the energy independency between buildings, industries, and the natural environment. And it shows that to the stakeholder of urban project. So I could talk at length about these results and the lessons to be learned for collective using, but I have exceeded my time. And I just like to show you, if you want to find more information and more results, you can consult our website, and especially cycle of webinar we organize on local energy communities. So thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Gilles. I mean, I've been part of energy projects or as advisor, and seeing your project makes me think how important it is to embed architecture and design right at the start. You know, you can't just be coming in later and advising. And it really comes through strongly is this integration in your project. It also made me think about the transdisciplinary language of modeling and representation. You know, how do we draw things in a transdisciplinary way? How do we speak about things in a transdisciplinary way? Thank you so much. Okay, so well, we've got about a quarter of an hour for questions. So please, people, get typing them into the box. But I think I have to start. If the speakers would come back on, and Gilles, if you would stop sharing, by thinking about measures that we could do to make things more transdisciplinary. What do you think needs to be done to make this field of housing work better together with itself, in a sense? Anyone volunteer to start on that question?
Mm-hmm.
Do speak or put your hand up or something. David, you look like you're going to say something.
Just to start this off, I mean, the first thing to say is, as we've all agreed, it's not easy. It's actually very, very difficult. The first thing I think is how you actually define what you're looking at. And I think that that's the kind of starting point for me, which is that we have tended perhaps before to take our disciplinary lenses into what we're actually looking at and defined it in those kinds of terms. Whereas the first thing to do, and I think, you know, the last example, Gilles, was a very good one, that if you actually define what you're looking at in a wider kind of field, you spend some attention kind of looking and defining what you're looking at. And, you know, there's been a few suggestions also about participatory ways of doing that, not just taking academics to do that, but actually having constructive ways of engaging with others and co-production knowledge, co-production of actually defining what you're to look at. And then it becomes easier, because if you've defined things in a certain kind of very broad, holistic way, then it's your job to try and actually bring the tools together to look at that. And that, of course, is not easy, as we will say, but it pushes you in that direction, I think. And that's, I would say, the most important stage.
Would anybody like to add anything or respond to David? Ashraf.
Okay, can I just add a couple of points? I think to be able to promote, and these are from more architecture perspective, architecture practice perspective. If we are really aiming for transdisciplinary thinking to be part of the culture of practices, of course, it's not going to replace disciplinary research. We're not saying this. But I would say that there are two important points. The first is about, or relates to research-based practice, not practice-based research. And if we consider evidence-based design, building performance evaluation, participatory design and practice as three ethical approaches and fundamentals to integrate as part of the production of housing. That's one. And two, basically, and it's a role of professional organizations, academics, and universities, the role of the architect should be really re-looked at differently. So it is not the architect who's sitting in an office with a tie, waiting for a client to come in with a project. We don't have this architect anymore. We have a different type of architect who can promote transdisciplinarity if they have the mindset of facilitation and advocacy. So I'll stop here.
I think that's really, I totally agree, Ashraf. We've got a question here, really great one from Danny. How can a transdisciplinary approach inform architecture education? Ashraf, you sigh. What are you going to say?
I want to say it's, in my view, it is really very difficult. Of course, it's part of the culture of architecture. If you look at the studio and how environmental technology and construction technologies are integrated into the studio in terms of review, assessment, delivery, and the production of design itself. So there is a transdisciplinary dimension, the practice of architecture already, but there is also the challenge of university structures. Once we say departments, faculties, and units, and all of these, we are decomposing knowledge into fragmented pieces within departments, are not allowing for transdisciplinarity. Because I will tend to talk to the people who are next to me in the office and in the floor and in the department. So that idea, I think the whole idea of the university, which we have now, an idea that was generated during the Enlightenment, and we are still working with the same idea, I think that needs to change. What is the role of the university? And that's not only about architecture, it's about all kinds of disciplines. Do we still want to have the same university that was invented 200 years ago, 300 years ago? I don't think this would be the case. So
I would want to add something about this because I think we are trying hard in Sheffield, and I know that Flora knows, and probably Karim, who might be around also, knows very well this, that to have transdisciplinary programs, and we have a number of type of programs, like, for example, life projects that are let's say projects in which the students are working as a team, sometimes across the programs, and with local organizations, sometimes with practices, sometimes with external experts. And I think these are forms of pioneering somehow transdisciplinary teaching that will conduct to products that are not only the product of the architect, that are involving a very complex team of stakeholders. And I think I agree that the university as it is organized now is probably outdated, but it is to us also to push these pioneering programs and ways of doing that are going more into this transdisciplinarity, but also into transforming the university as an asset for the city, for the community, for the society, and I really, feel. I think we should feel responsible for this as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. So there's a new university starting up in London, which is all about transdisciplinarity in a sense. But maybe things don't have to go quite that far. But there's a balance to be struck between disciplinary knowledge and transdisciplinary knowledge that I think we really need to get a handle on. What do you think is the casualty of this lack of transdisciplinarity? Who are we failing because of the lack of transdisciplinarity? Would anyone like to answer that question?
Well, maybe I'll start. I think we're failing everybody by doing it. And particularly, I think, in a field like housing, or however you want to define it, architecture, we're failing the people who live in the dwellings because we're failing policy. And I think we're failing policy because so many interactions, kind of policy interactions, are aimed at one particular element, and they have all kinds of impacts which are beyond what the original was their original intention was of the intervention. So we're always trying to, I'm thinking of and trying to think of an analogy, but it's not there, but it's we're trying to kind of, with individual things aimed at one part of a very extensive kind of network, rather than looking at the interactions and the network itself. So we're actually failing, and I think the ideas about sustainability is a classic example of that, really. That, for example, we may be looking at things like the technologies of heating and their energy use, but we're not looking at the same time as how people use that and the cultures which underpin that. So we're failing the planet by actually not looking at those things together.
I think you're right. I mean, energy is a very classic example because of research that shows that, for example, old people will feel warm if the decor of the room is warm. It has nothing to do with the actual measurement. Well, not much to do with the measurement. These things are so subjective. I think that's absolutely right. And I've recently read a quote by Christine Whitehead, who says really that the housing that we have in Britain, which is in general very terrible, is a direct failure of theory, a failure of academia, which is a damning indictment. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything on the subject. Ashraf, are you trying to?
No, actually, Gilles is first.
Oh, Gilles.
Okay. Thank you, Ashraf. In fact, almost everybody knows that interdisciplinary is useful, very useful to introduce new environmental issues in the urban project, and also in the skills of urban and architect. Everybody knows that, and but the problem is that in many universities, and it's also in my university, the assessment of researcher is mainly done according to disciplinary border. So the main we can easily find money, find fund to make interdisciplinary project. It's not difficult, but the difficulty is to involve different disciplines in the same project. So that's why I think we need to have a common aim of the project, and this aim is usually an operational aim. It's not it can't be directly an interdisciplinary aim. It have to be or scientific aim. It have to be an operational project. So that's why in our project, in the project I present, we focus on tools. And two different tools. One concerns architectural design, the other concerns mainly the energy system design. But both have to integrate environmental issues, both have to integrate the participation of the people, and the fact that the decisions are usually a combination in an hybridation of different stakeholder issues and with their constraints and with their aims. So that was the fact that environmental renewable energy are necessary and have to be strongly developed was in fact a philanthropic aim of the of research. So I think we have to, that is a strong lever for interdisciplinary collaboration. And the second thing is the ability to understand together. And we, each discipline, have to forget its own causality. Economists have to forget that financial flow are the main driver of the actors. Sociologists have to forget that social norms are the main driver of the practice of user or the practice of decision maker. So we need flat ontology. That's why the notion of assemblage here, socio-energy assemblage, that recognize both materiality and social norms, have been used in this project. That's just an example. We can find other examples. But flat ontology is a condition of collaborations between researchers.
Thank you, Gilles. I think that's a very good point upon which to complete our discussion. And I think also what you were talking about alludes to there are many structural things in the lives of young researchers and indeed old researchers in universities and in setups that make it very difficult to do transdisciplinary research. Not least when a project bid is assessed by an interdisciplinary group, people tend to very much assess it from their own point of view, and that they need to have a flat ontology. And I think we all have to have a generosity to each other and respect for each other's research areas to allow transdisciplinary work to flourish. But that is what's one of the most remarkable things about this ReadWell network, that this is a real opportunity for young people to work in a really transdisciplinary way. So I'm going to wrap up the public session here by thanking our speakers very, very much. Thank you to Ashraf, to David, to Doina, and to Gilles. We'll be having a session afterwards with early stage researchers, but which will be a different session. And thank you to all the audience who've come through. Thank you for people who've made comments and questions. And thank you to Adriana for organizing the session, and for Alexandra and Leandro for making it all happen. Well, this is the first of our ReadWell roundtables, and I'm sure it won't be the last. And I think this particular session, I think, will be an amazingly useful resource for anybody starting a PhD in this world of housing, actually. I shall certainly be using it, and it's been recorded. So you can go back and learn from it at a later stage. So I really do appreciate everybody's help, and thank you very much for coming. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.